Welcome to our vCDM API programming tutorials. In this third part, we will implement a small vCDM add-on. This is the example we will implement. We will implement a vCDM add-on using Visual Studio.NET and implement it in .NET 4.0. First, we have to implement two interfaces. The first interface, iAddon, is every add-on has to implement this. We will see how this works. And then we will add an action, a context menu action on the class datasets. So for this, we will have to implement the interface iAction. We will see this in the tutorial. The task is then to retrieve CDM objects. In our case, we want to retrieve datasets and the calibrated content of these datasets. And then we want to export the calibrated content into a customer-specific file format. Start with the development of our first vCDM add-on. So the task is we want to integrate logic into the vCDM client. In this example, we want to export calibrated content into our own specific parameter set format. And therefore, for sure, we need an entrance point for our logic. So we will add a new menu item in our ribbon menu and also as context menu. But first of all, we have to set up our solution in Visual Studio. Here we are using Visual Studio 2015. I want to create a new project and I want to create a new class library, which is a DLL file later. Let me show you the whole dialog. We have a location here. We give the project a name, for example, my first add-on. As said, we have class library as output type, and we choose the .NET Framework 4.0 as target runtime. Okay. I prefer not to create an own directory for the solution, but this is in your choice. Doesn't matter. Okay. Then we have a plain solution map with a reference class 1 created by Visual Studio. We have typical references here to system.xml, system data, system core, and so on. And what we want to achieve now is we want to write an add-on. So we have to implement the interface iAddon, which for sure is not known right now to Visual Studio because it does know nothing about vCDM. So first we have to add some references to the project. This we can do by add reference and browse. And clicking this browse button, then you can browse to the vCDM 5.6 program directory. And here you find all the libraries which you can use for your programming. Additionally, there are other libraries and plugins, easy add-ons. For example, the easy add-on framework we also need. Let me just add some references here. So here you can see we add some references, for example, the Easy Addon Framework DLL, which lies in plugins Easy Addons, and some various other DLLs for interfacing with CDM and for interfacing with EDM. Okay, then Visual Studio now should know our iAddon using vector collab core data model extensibility. And the next Visual Studio says we don't implement everything which is defined in iAddon. So we can fix this problem by implementing the interface. Then Visual Studio will create the methods which we have to implement. First of all, we have to provide a speaking name, for example, my first add-on. Then we can interact when a domain is changed. We don't to interact here. We can interact when domain is left. When domain is initialized, at least we have to return true here. Return true. We can do some tidy up mechanisms, for example, when unloading the add-on, so when logging out. And for now, the most important method here, populate global actions. Here we can, as the name says, populate our global actions. We can announce to CDM which actions we want to have in our plugin. So first of all, we have to add our action to the list of global actions. So here we say global actions add and give our action a name. For example, this would be my export action. My export action. So my export action is not defined right now, so we define it, generating a local my export action, iAction. Then here we can introduce a new class, my export action. Visual Studio again says this class doesn't exist, then just create it, please. In my first add-on, now it introduced a new file, my export action, with an empty class, with an empty default constructor. We will cover this later. Okay, so we added our export action to the list of global actions, and later we can also introduce our action to the GUI extension service. And here you have methods like add to shortcut, add to context menu, add to main menu, add to ribbon menu, and add to toolbar. In our case, we want to first add our action to the context menu. You just have to provide the action to add. So here, my export action. Then you can provide an additional path. In our example, additional exports, for example. Then next, we want to add our action to the main menu. Add to main menu, the same again, my export action. And again, you can give a path. We just use again additional exports. And last but not least, we want to add our action to the ribbon menu. Also here, we have to provide the action as first parameter. Then we can specify the ribbon, which we use also additional exports. And here we have to define the band, which is a sub-item of a ribbon. We will see it later. Just use calibration. And we want to display a big icon, the big icon of the action. So this is how you can register an action with your add-on, and this is the add-on we implemented. So let's now go to the my export action, and you will see we have a new class, my export action, which implements iAction. But it really doesn't, so there is an error here. You are missing the implementation of some properties and some methods. But we can say to Visual Studio, yes, implement them for us. First of all, we have to provide a speaking description. For example, we could say export of calibrated content into customer-specific delivery file. Then we have to provide, or we can provide the icon for our action. Here we see system drawing.icon is not known, system drawing is not known, so we can also add an additional reference. This time we have to use a .NET library, which is a system.drawing. System drawing. There it is. Okay. We can return null here, but we could also retrieve an icon out of the CDM icons using vector common UI resources. So return icons dot, and here are different icons which are used by vCDM. For example, the ICO export, which is just an icon which shows an export button. So next we have to provide a unique ID. Here, this is a string. So here, normally I use just a namespace, in our case, my first add-on, and the name of the add-on. So here, my export action. Then we have to provide if our action shall be available globally. So if it is available in principle, let's say, yes, this is true. And with implementing is enable, you can decide if the menu is the action is grayed out, the menu button is grayed out or not. Let me just copy paste a little code snippet here, and we will discuss this. So first of all, when we want to be enabled, so we want to be clickable as a menu item, as soon as we have selected in the client exactly one version, and this version must be of class DST, which stands for dataset. Okay. So first we ask the client UI frame by using vector collab core UI frame. Give me your current collection, and we get back an IEnumerable from system collection generic of iClient GUI selection. Then we iterate over this current selection and only filter out the client GUI version selection. And afterwards, we check is exactly one item selected, otherwise we present false. Then from this selection, by using the property selected version, we get a so-called I version, which is a very, very important class in EDM. It just stands for one version, and you can do many, many operations on an I version. You will see it often when programming EDM. So we have to use vector EC core runtime to have I version available. Then here, this I version is being asked, give me your element, give me your element class, give me the name of your element class, and this must be DST, which stands for datasets. If this is not the case, then we return false, which grays out our icon. If everything went through until here, then we just want to remember the selected version, so we don't have to do this all again for later operation. So here we want to remember it, generate property, my export action selected version. Then Visual Studio will create us a property. You can find it here, selected version with a getter and a private setter. Okay, then we have to provide a speaking name for our action. This name is being used for creating the context menu item. An example, so it's the name for the context menu item. Here we can, for example, use export calibration as text. Export calibration as text. We don't have to view this will be changed, but the most important method here is the onExecute method. This method is being called as soon as the action is being executed, as the name already says. So here we can do our whole logic, and it is a good pattern here to start with a try catch block, because if anything fails here in our execution, then for sure we want to have a speaking error message, which, for example, we could provide in a message box, messagebox.show. Problem here is that Visual Studio doesn't know message box here. We have to add another reference to system system forms, exactly. Where is it? System Windows Forms, I think it's called. There it is, System Windows Forms. Okay, then it should know message box using System Windows Forms. In a message box, if we catch an exception, we can, for example, show the exception message, error occurred, message box button, okay, and we want to have an error icon here, message box icon dot error. Okay, so here goes the thing we want to do, and we don't want to implement it here. So we introduce a new class We are calling it CDM helper, for example, and we want to implement an export calibrated content method, and we want to export the calibrated content of this selected version, the version we remembered earlier. So again, Visual Studio now doesn't know what a CDM helper is, and we just say generate class for CDM helper, and again it will create a new file, CDM helper, and so on and so forth. Then it says we don't have a method in here in this class, so also we can use the manual generate method for this class. And if we have a look in our CDM helper, now we have a small stub here. But I think it's time now to test our add-on before we implement here the export calibrated content method. And now is the question, how can we test our add-on? First of all, we added some references here. Let me show you one thing first. We go to the properties of the project, and in the project we here at Vector work that we set the output path directly to our client directory. So when I compile the add-on, then the output directly goes into the client. So I have to choose the my program folder here. Where is it again? Vector. Vector vCDM 5.6, and we don't have to put our add-on directly beside the easy.exe, which resides in this directory, but in the subfolder plugins, easy add-ons. So this is the target folder into here. Then, as said, if I now would build the add-on, then all the output will go into this directory. But we added some references here. An example, the easy add-on framework reference. Let me scroll a little bit smaller. So for example, for the add-on framework, we see here a copy local is set to true, which is the default in Visual Studio when I add external references. But this means if I build the add-on, then it will copy the easy add-on framework also in this directory. We don't want to have this because we already have our easy add-on framework in this directory. The same is true for all other external libraries. So as soon as you add references, please be aware to set these copy local to false. You see for the .NET assemblies, Visual Studio already does the right thing. But again, for Vector CDM runtime interop, for example, it is also set to copy local, or here it is also worse than copy local. It embeds the whole type library here into our compilation. We sure don't want to have this because the Vector CDM runtime interop is loaded by EDM, not by our add-on. So set this to false and later set this to false. Here also, we don't want to copy. Sadly, there is no global option in Visual Studio to do this, to change this behavior. So you have to be aware of this each time you add a new external reference. So now everything should be on copy local false, and we don't overwrite our assemblies we already have in the vCDM client. Then we here have a tab which is called debug. You only have this tab in the real Visual Studio, but not in Visual Studio Express. In Visual Studio Express, you can't start external programs when debugging application, which means with Visual Studio Express, you can't debug add-ons. You can develop them and you can test them, but you can't set breakpoints and you can't step into your methods, which is a little drawback. But most likely for the beginning, you can start with Visual Studio Express. Okay, we want to start an external program here, and we want to start the easy.exe here. So I have to again to find my program directory, vCDM 5.6. easy exe. Okay, so if I now press F5, then the add-on is compiled and easy exe is being started. But the easy doesn't know that this is an add-on and doesn't know that it shall start us. So we first have to go into the directory here. Wait a moment, my Explorer is on the other window. We go into the directory and go into subfolder plugins, and there is a subfolder easy client config. And here we change this XML file. You already see that there are some add-ons registered by the product on its own. And now we want to add another add-on, which is called my first addon.dll. Let me recheck this. My first add-on. Okay, my first addon.dll. Don't forget to save. I'm not with administrative permissions, so I have to do a little trick. We just store this on the desktop, and from the desktop we copy it into the program folder. Okay, then I open Visual Studio again. Okay, back in Visual Studio. Since Visual Studio 2013, we have to set one additional option. Again, it's on the Debug tab. We have to enable native code debugging. This sadly disables edit and continue, but otherwise you will get a memory access violation with vCDM client. So you have to set this option too. Then with Visual Studio Express, now you just would build your application, build solution with Control Shift and B, which builds and copies the files into the according directory. Then you can start the easy exe on your own, or with the real Visual Studio here, we can just press F5, which means start debugging F5. So I press F5 now, and then easy vCDM should come up with the login dialog. So first of all, we have to log in for sure. Again, we use the same server with CVM CDM STD, which is just our test server. Okay, then ECCDM comes up. Let me make it a little bit smaller that you can see the whole application. Looks like that. Okay. Again, we have our example project here. We have 3 datasets in here, which have little calibration. You can see parameter values. There are only 5 parameters here, and each of this parameter has a value. Now what we did is one time we have our add-on integrated into context menu. So we have on right click on the class DST, we have additional exports, export calibration as text. For sure, if I click, nothing happens because we nothing implemented, but we have our context menu. If I select 2 data sets, for example, then the menu entry is missing because it's grayed out. Yeah? We don't have the ability to export 2 datasets at once in our implementation. For sure, you can implement and support multiple datasets. Also, we are in the ribbon mode here, so this is a ribbon, and we put an additional ribbon, which here is known as additional exports. As you remember, we specified this in our add-on. We also could integrate into these ribbons. For example, if I want to integrate into advanced ribbon, then I just type advanced as ribbon. But here we had our own ribbon and our own pane here, which is called calibration. Maybe let me show you this again. If we look in our add-on, then this we can find here, add to ribbon, additional export, this is the name of the ribbon. And here we have the word calibration, which is the pane on the ribbon calibration. And here is our action, export calibration as text. And for sure, if I click here, then nothing will happen because we didn't implement something here. Okay, then let's do this. I close vCDM again, then it needs a few seconds until Easy is shut down and we are back in the Visual Studio editor. So we ended here in implementing our export calibrated content method of the CDM helper class. And let me just copy paste a little bit code. We don't have to write it in this WebEx, but we will go through the lines step by step. Okay. So first of all, we are an add-on and we are loaded by EDM, but we don't know anything right now about CDM. So first of all, we have to get the Nestor API, which can be done over the C plugin proxy from the add-on framework. We have to use easy add-on framework, C plugin proxy, and there we can get the Nestor API, which is a vector collab runtime into application. If you have a look in the CHM documents in your client, then you will find the according explanation of the interface I application. So this is the EDM client, let's say. Okay, with the EDM client, we can ask, please give us the plugin neadh.application, which stands for the CDM plugin. So if we call this method, then we get back the CDM plugin, and the CDM plugin is represented by CDM domain, which comes out of the namespace vector CDM runtime interop. So when we have our CDM domain, then we can ask the CDM domain, please give us the dataset with an according version ID. So here it's called version, and I should also call it here version. It's only the name of the parameter. So into this method, we provide the selected version out of the context menu. We get the ID of this version, and then we say to CDM, please give us the dataset with the according version ID. This is a string normally, but the string is just a number. Then we get back a CDM dataset, which is of type CDM dataset. And when you look on the namespace, we are in vector CDM runtime interop now, which is again a CDM object. So you will find on this object many methods which are CDM, so calibration data management related. For example, getting calibrated content. We will use this method later. You also can create parameters and so on and so forth. You can get a project, you can get software parent infos, product key, program key, and so on and so on. Here in this example, we just want to get the whole calibrated content out of the dataset. Be aware this can be multiple thousand of parameters, so maybe you will also want to use the filtered method. Here you can provide parameter names which you want to retrieve the value of. Last but not least, we want to use out of the system collection generic namespace the class list, which is typed to string. So this is a typed string list here. And we iterate over the calibrated content. The calibrated content is a CDM collection which contains CDM parameter history items. So we had this example also in our Excel sheet example. This is not only the value of the parameter, but also additional information. We see this in the next line. Out of the CDM history item, we can ask for sure the parameter value, here in this example as ASCII. But we also can ask it about the unit. We can also ask about parameter name, who integrated this value into the dataset, when was it integrated, and so on and so on. Then we just use all these information we retrieved out of the history item, and we produce one line, which looks like, I have no example in the code here, but we can see it here, which looks like this one. So first we have the parameter name, then an equal sign, then we have the parameter value and its unit, and then we want to put a little comment with /* modified by. Then we want to have the integration user as fourth parameter and the integration date in brackets as the fifth parameter. Then we just add this new line to our collection here, to our list here. Afterwards, we want to sort it. Then we want to put them out, put the lines out into a file. We just use the product key as the file name and the extension .txt here. And then we need a method to write our lines into the file name. Right now, the IO helper is not known, so we just let Visual Studio create an according class here. And afterwards, it will show an error that there is no write line method. So also I generate a stub here for write line. And if we go into the implementation of IO helper, then we will see our stub here with write line gets several lines and shall write these lines into a file with this file name. And again, let me just copy paste this code. We can also step through this code, but very fast because it has nothing to do with CDM. It's only file operation. So first we want to show a save file dialog. You will see this later. Take the file name out of the file dialog. See if the user pressed OK in the file dialog. Then we get a file info wrapper or system IO for the select file. Then we check if it already exists. We delete it. And then we just use a stream writer to write every single line into this file. Afterwards, as last step, we just open this txt file by using process.start out of system diagnostics, which does nothing else like double-clicking the file, let's say, in Windows. So now let's test our add-on. I again just press F5. Then everything is compiled, is copied to the output directory. vCDM is starting up again. Okay, then vCDM loads up. And now let's have a look again on this first dataset, for example, we selected here, and have a look in the parameter values. We have only little calibrated content. We have here 5 parameters. First is vCDM array element 0, array element 1, array element 2, and so on. The first value is -4, the second value is 2, the third value is 5, and so on. So let me select exactly one data set. We go to additional exports and say export calibration as text. The next save as dialog comes up, which already asks us to save as file name 2.0 EU5AT, which is just the product key of the selected dataset with ending .txt. We decide to save it on a desktop, for example. Say save, and afterwards immediately the file opens. And if we have a look on the content of the file, then we see vCDM array element 0 is -4, vCDM array element 1 is 2, and so on and so forth, modified by vCDM, this is me, at 17th of March at 16 o'clock and 25 minutes. That's all we wanted to achieve with this add-on. If you want to have further look in further information materials, we have at once the product documentation, which is installed in your vCDM client. So just open the installation directory of your vCDM client, go to the subfolder help, and there you will find many CHM files, Windows files. There are two important ones if you want to develop vCDM with vCDM APIs. The first one is the EasyEDM API CHM. The second one is the EasyCDM API CHM. Then we have multiple documents on our websites for you for downloading. So there are 2 API tutorials, one vCDM application note which shows how to program with vCDM from the client side. And we have one document where all the web service interface methods are described in detail. Then also we have different engineering videos which show especially using the COM API, programming an add-on, and programming web services clients. You can find also all examples which we have implemented in these engineering videos on our website. So thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you again in another video.